There are moments in every region when the sky shifts colors without warning, when the ground trembles beneath ancient stones, when the very air feels heavier than it should. These are the moments when something greater than ourselves moves through the world, when forces older than memory stir from their long slumber. Tonight, we drift through the stories of those beings who shape entire landscapes with their presence alone, who guard the delicate balance between creation and chaos. Before you drift off, maybe tap subscribe for more gentle videos, and let me know where you're listening from tonight. These are the legendary Pokémon, and their stories reach back to the very beginning of everything we know. Some were born from the void before time itself existed, while others emerged from the desperate ambitions of those who sought to control what should never be controlled. Each one carries with it a weight of history, a purpose woven into the fabric of existence itself. We will travel slowly through every region, pausing in the quiet spaces between facts to let the stories settle around us like evening mist. From Kanto's frozen caves, where ice crystallizes in impossible patterns, to Paldea's deepest crater, where time moves differently than anywhere else, we will trace the paths these beings have carved through legend and reality alike. In the vastness of the Pokémon world, not every extraordinary being occupies the same space in our understanding. There exists a subtle distinction, one that separates those who are woven into the very structure of regional history from those who exist just beyond the edges of what can be proven. The legendary Pokémon stand at the center of creation stories, their names spoken in every village, their presence shaping the way entire civilizations developed over thousands of years. Mythical Pokémon, however, dwell in a different realm altogether. They are whispered about in voices that grow quiet when strangers approach, creatures whose existence some believe in with absolute certainty, while others dismiss as elaborate folklore. Their appearances are so rare that generations pass without a single confirmed sighting, and yet the stories persist, passed down through families like precious heirlooms. As we drift a little deeper tonight, consider how these categories blur at their edges. A legendary Pokémon in one region might be considered mythical in another, known only through ancient texts that few bother to read anymore. The difference often lies not in the creatures themselves, but in how deeply their stories have embedded themselves in the collective memory of the people who live alongside them. The legendary birds of Kanto, for instance, have been seen by enough trainers over the decades that their existence cannot be reasonably doubted. They appear in weather patterns, leave the physical traces of their passage, and occasionally reveal themselves to those who venture into their territories with the right combination of respect and determination. But even these well-documented beings maintain an air of mystery, choosing when and where they appear according to logic that remains unknowable to most. Mythical Pokémon, by contrast, might be encountered only once in a trainer's entire lifetime, if at all. They manifest during specific conditions, vanish without explanation, and leave behind only the faintest evidence of their presence. Some researchers spend decades pursuing a single confirmed sighting, following rumors across continents, only to come away with nothing more than second-hand accounts and ambiguous photographs. The story must begin somewhere, and so we return to Kanto, where the franchise itself first took root in the collective imagination of a generation. This region, with its mixture of urban sprawl and wild landscapes, holds within it the seeds of everything that would come after. Here, in laboratories and mountain caves, on windswept islands, and in the deepest forests, the first legendary Pokémon made themselves known. Before we continue, maybe tap subscribe for more calming videos, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Long before trainers walked the routes between cities, long before anyone thought to categorize and study these beings systematically, Mew existed in the jungles far from civilization. The researchers who discovered it in Guyana could never have imagined what their find would eventually lead to. Here was a creature whose genetic code seemed to contain echoes of every other Pokémon, as though it stood at the root of an evolutionary tree so vast that its branches reached into every ecosystem on the planet. The implications stretched beyond simple biology. If Mew truly represented a common ancestor, then the diversity of Pokémon life itself became something that could be traced backward, followed like a thread through the tangled history of the natural world. But Mew itself offered no explanations, no convenient answers to the questions its existence raised. Those who encountered it described a playful being, curious and gentle, with psychic abilities that manifested in ways that seemed almost whimsical. It would vanish mid-conversation, reappear on the other side of a clearing, transform its shape into that of other Pokémon with apparently no effort whatsoever. This was not a creature that operated according to rules anyone understood. Slowly, the story widens to encompass what came after that discovery. The scientific community, confronted with evidence of such extraordinary genetic potential, could not resist the temptation to experiment, to push boundaries, to see what might be possible if human ingenuity could harness what nature had created over eons. In a laboratory on Cinnabar Island, surrounded by volcanic stone and the constant sound of waves against cliffs, something unprecedented began to take shape. The scientists working there had obtained genetic material from Mew, fragments of DNA that they believed could be enhanced, refined, improved upon. They envisioned creating the ultimate Pokémon, one that would possess all of Mew's potential, but amplified, focused, made more powerful through careful manipulation. The journals left behind in the abandoned mansion tell a story of gradual escalation. Early entries speak of excitement, of breakthrough after breakthrough as cells divided and grew according to plan. The scientists saw themselves as pioneers, pushing into territory where no one had ventured before. They documented everything meticulously, convinced that future generations would study their work as a turning point in humanity's understanding of Pokémon. But the tone in those journals shifts as the project progresses. There are mentions of unexpected complications, of a consciousness emerging faster and with more intensity than anticipated. The creature they were creating began to exhibit awareness before its physical form had fully stabilized, and that awareness was accompanied by something the scientists had not planned for: questions about its own existence, about the nature of its creation, about why it had been brought into being. There's a quiet comfort in remembering moments like these, not because they ended well, but because they remind us that even the most carefully laid plans can unravel when we forget to consider what we are actually creating. Mewtwo was not simply a more powerful version of Mew. It was something entirely new, a being with its own thoughts, its own will, its own growing sense of identity and purpose. The final entries in those journals speak of power beyond control, of psychic abilities that overwhelmed every containment system the scientists had devised. Mewtwo destroyed the laboratory and everyone in it, not out of malice necessarily, but because it could not tolerate remaining imprisoned in a place where its only purpose was to serve as an experiment. It fled into the unknown reaches of Cerulean Cave, where it remained for years, wrestling with questions about identity and belonging that no Pokémon before it had ever needed to confront. While Mewtwo's story unfolded in secret, 3 other legendary beings moved through Kanto's skies and peaks, embodying forces that had existed long before humans arrived to name and categorize them. Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres represent something primal about the world itself, the elemental powers that shape weather, that determine whether crops flourish or fail, that can bring either life-giving rain or destructive storms. Articuno dwells in frozen places where few dare to venture. The Seafoam Islands, with their labyrinthine caves and treacherous ice flows, provide exactly the kind of environment where this legendary bird feels most at home. Those who have glimpsed it describe wings that trail crystalline frost in their wake, a presence that seems to lower the temperature of everything nearby, and eyes that hold intelligence, ancient and patient. The bird does not create winter single-handedly, but its movements through certain regions often coincide with unusual cold snaps, with blizzards that arrive without warning and blanket entire valleys in snow. It is both a herald and an embodiment of ice itself, and the Pokémon that naturally inhabit frozen environments seem to show it a kind of reverence, moving aside when it passes overhead. Zapdos presents a stark contrast, crackling with electrical energy that makes the air itself hum with tension. The abandoned power plant, where trainers sometimes encounter it, seems almost laughably inadequate as a dwelling place for such a being. Electrical equipment sparks and fails in its presence, circuits overload without explanation, and thunderstorms gather overhead even on days when the forecast called for clear skies. There are accounts from ship captains who have seen it flying through storm clouds far out at sea, each beat of its wings accompanied by branching lightning that illuminates the darkness for miles in every direction. It does not cause every thunderstorm, but there seems to be a connection between its movements and the most powerful electrical disturbances that sweep across the region. As we drift a little deeper tonight, we come to Moltres, the flame Pokémon that makes its home in the volcanic heart of Victory Road. Here, where trainers must navigate through the final challenges before reaching the Pokémon League, this legendary bird roosts among rivers of lava and chambers filled with superheated air. Its feathers glow with their own internal heat, and its cry echoes through stone corridors like the roar of a furnace. Moltres embodies not just fire, but the concept of renewal that fire represents. Forests that burn make way for new growth. Volcanic soil produces the richest farmland, and the heat of summer follows the cold of winter in an endless cycle. This bird exists at the heart of that cycle, neither creating it nor controlling it entirely, but serving as its living representation. The three birds together form a kind of equilibrium. When one becomes too active, when ice spreads too far, or storms rage too frequently, the others seem to respond, re-establishing balance through their mere presence. It is not cooperation in any deliberate sense, but rather a natural regulation that occurs because these three legendary beings exist in relation to one another. Our journey carries us westward now, into Johto, a region where ancient and modern exist side by side in ways that feel more pronounced than elsewhere. Here, traditions run deeper, and the connection between people and legendary Pokémon has been maintained through centuries of careful stewardship and respect. The stories here feel older somehow, less shaped by recent events, more rooted in a time when the boundaries between the human and Pokémon worlds were less clearly defined. In Ekritique City, two towers once stood as monuments to this connection. The Brass Tower and the Bell Tower rose into the sky, each one a testament to the bond between humanity and the legendary birds that made their home in Johto's skies. But where Kanto's legendary birds embody raw, elemental power, Johto's legends speak to something different: the cycle of life and death, the possibility of rebirth, and the terrible consequences of breaking sacred bonds. The towers themselves represented architectural achievements that modern builders struggle to replicate. Each stone was cut to precise specifications and fit together without mortar, held in place through engineering genius and possibly through something more mystical. The brass tower gleamed in sunlight, its metal components reflecting light in patterns that changed throughout the day, creating an ever-shifting display that observers found mesmerizing. The bell tower, constructed primarily of wood and traditional materials, contained massive bells whose tones could be heard across the entire region when rung. These bells served both practical and ceremonial purposes, marking important moments in the community's calendar and summoning people to gatherings when decisions affecting everyone needed to be made. 3 centuries before our time, before any living trainer can remember, a lightning strike set the brass tower ablaze. The fire consumed everything, burning so hot and so fast that no amount of water could extinguish it. 3 Pokémon perished in that conflagration, ordinary Pokémon by most accounts, but ones who had dwelled in the tower for so long that they had become part of its spiritual foundation. The circumstances surrounding that fire remain unclear even now. Some accounts suggest the lightning came from a storm that appeared without warning on an otherwise clear day. Other versions speak of tensions within Ekritique City, conflicts between factions that might have led to sabotage. Still others whisper about curses, about warnings ignored, about hubris that invited divine punishment. What is certain is that the fire started at the tower's pinnacle and spread downward with unnatural speed. Witnesses described flames that seemed to burn in colors fire should not possess, heat so intense that people hundreds of feet away felt their skin blister. The metal components of the tower melted and ran like water, pooling at the structure's base in grotesque formations that cooled into shapes suggesting anguish and suffering. Rescue attempts proved futile. Those who tried to enter the burning tower were driven back by heat and smoke, while aerial approaches failed because flying Pokémon refused to venture near the flames. It was as if the fire itself possessed malevolent intelligence, actively preventing interference with its destructive purpose. The 3 Pokémon who perished were not legendary beings, but they were beloved by the community. They had lived in the tower for generations, tended by priests who maintained the sacred spaces where humans and Pokémon could meet in peaceful coexistence. Their loss represented more than simple death. It felt like a rupture in the natural order, a breaking of bonds that should have been inviolable. What happened next transformed Johto's understanding of death itself. From the ashes of that tragedy, 3 new legendary Pokémon emerged, their birth witnessed by hundreds of people who had gathered to mourn the tower's destruction. Ho-Oh, the Rainbow Guardian, who had roosted atop the brass tower for centuries, descended through smoke and ash, its presence bringing with it winds that temporarily cleared the air. The legendary bird cried out in a voice that resonated with power beyond sound, and where its tears fell onto the ashes, energy began to gather. Light coalesced into 3 distinct forms, growing brighter and more solid, until 3 entirely new beings stood where moments before only death and destruction had existed. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune rose from the ruins, resurrected by Ho-Oh's power in an act of creation that witnesses struggled to comprehend. These 3 beasts, as they came to be called, embodied the very forces that had destroyed them: lightning that had sparked the fire, flames that had consumed the tower, and water that had failed to save it. The transformation was not simply resurrection, but transfiguration. The Pokémon who emerged from Ho-Oh's blessing bore little resemblance to those who had perished. They were larger, more powerful, infused with abilities that elevated them to legendary status. Their very existence challenged conventional understanding of what death meant and whether it could ever be truly permanent. Raikou roams the land with restless energy, appearing during thunderstorms, as if drawn to the electricity that fills the air. Its presence brings sudden downpours that last for hours, rain falling so heavily that visibility drops to mere feet and rivers overflow their banks within minutes. Those who encounter it describe feeling the hair on their arms stand on end, the air charged with so much static that every surface they touch delivers a small shock. The legendary beast moves with speed that defies normal perception, covering miles in seconds, appearing and vanishing so quickly that witnesses often question whether they truly saw it or merely imagined its presence. This incredible velocity serves practical purposes. Raikou can reach any point in Johto within minutes of sensing a disturbance, allowing it to intervene in situations where timing matters. But this constant motion also suggests something deeper, a restlessness that might stem from the traumatic nature of its resurrection. Raikou never seems to settle anywhere for long, never allows itself the luxury of rest or relaxation. It is always moving, always searching, though what it searches for remains unclear even to those who have studied its patterns for decades. Some researchers theorize that Raikou seeks understanding of its own nature, trying to reconcile memories of its previous existence with the reality of what it has become. Others suggest it is drawn to storms, not just by affinity for electricity, but by some unconscious desire to return to the moment of its death and rebirth, to relive that transformation in hopes of finding meaning in it. Entei appears less frequently, but with no less impact. This legendary beast is said to be born anew with each volcano that erupts anywhere in the world, as if the destruction itself calls forth Entei's essence and gives it form. Whether this means multiple Enteis exist simultaneously, or whether a single Entei teleports between eruption sites remains subject to debate among scholars who track its appearances. Its passage leaves scorched earth behind, not from malice but simply from the sheer heat that radiates from its body. Grass wilts and turns brown before Entei draws near, leaves curl and crumble to ash as it passes, and the ground itself cracks beneath its paws as moisture evaporates from soil that moments earlier was damp and fertile. The heat Entei generates serves purposes beyond simple destruction. In volcanic regions where it appears, the legendary beast's presence can redirect lava flows, channeling destructive force away from populated areas and toward paths where it will cause less harm. This protective aspect of its nature suggests that Entei, despite being born from destruction, has taken upon itself a guardian role that prioritizes prevention of catastrophe. Witnesses who have seen Entei describe it as moving with purpose and dignity, each step deliberate, each decision seemingly made after careful consideration. This contrasts sharply with Raikou's frantic energy, suggesting that while both legendary beasts emerged from the same tragedy, they processed that experience in fundamentally different ways. Before we move deeper, maybe tap subscribe for more relaxing videos, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. Suicune stands apart from its companions in temperament and purpose. Where Raikou and Entei embody violence and raw power, elements that destroy before they can build, Suicune represents purification, the cleansing force of water that washes away corruption and restores balance. It seeks out polluted lakes and rivers, and where it touches the water, impurities dissolve and clarity returns. This healing ability operates on both physical and spiritual levels. Contaminated water becomes safe to drink within minutes of Suicune's intervention, toxins breaking down into harmless components through processes that chemistry cannot adequately explain. But beyond removing physical pollutants, Suicune's presence seems to cleanse to something more subtle, an emotional or spiritual taint that accumulates in places where suffering has occurred. Communities living near water sources that Suicune has visited report changes that extend beyond improved water quality. People describe feeling lighter, as if burdens they had carried for years suddenly became easier to bear. Old grudges lose their intensity, long-standing conflicts seem less worth maintaining, and a general sense of peace settles over the area for weeks after the legendary beast's departure. Suicune moves with grace that borders on the supernatural, its paws barely touching the ground as it runs, its crystalline mane flowing behind it in patterns that seem to defy wind and gravity. It can cross water surfaces without sinking, can leap distances that should be impossible given its size and weight, and can vanish into mist so completely that even experienced trackers lose its trail within seconds. The three beasts do not travel together, instead moving independently across the region as if following routes that only they can perceive. Occasionally, trainers report seeing two or even all three in the same general area, but never close enough to interact directly. It is as if an invisible boundary keeps them separated, as if their very natures prevent them from occupying the same space for too long. This separation might stem from the circumstances of their resurrection. They were created simultaneously from a single act of divine intervention, but they were created as distinct beings with different purposes. Forcing them to remain together might undermine those individual purposes, might create conflicts between their natures that would prevent any of them from functioning optimally. Or perhaps the separation is self-imposed, each legendary beast choosing isolation because proximity to the others triggers memories of trauma they would prefer to leave dormant. They died together, were resurrected together, but that shared experience might have created bonds they find painful to acknowledge, connections that remind them of what they lost when their previous forms ceased to exist. Ancient texts preserved in Ecruteak's libraries speak of rituals that were performed in the brass tower before its destruction, ceremonies that required coordination between the three Pokémon who would eventually become the legendary beasts. These rituals supposedly maintained harmony between competing forces in nature, preventing any single element from dominating to the point where balance collapsed. When the tower burned and those rituals could no longer be performed, observers noted changes in Johto's weather patterns. Storms became more severe and less predictable, droughts lasted longer than historical records suggested they should, and the transition between seasons grew more abrupt and jarring. Some attributed these changes to the loss of the tower itself, while others believed the disruption stemmed from the three Pokemon's deaths. The legendary beast's resurrection may have restored some of what was lost, but in transformed fashion. Where the original rituals required conscious cooperation between three beings working in concert, the legendary beasts now maintain balance. Through their independent actions, each one addressing problems in its own way without needing to coordinate with the others. This represents either elegant efficiency or tragic fragmentation, depending on perspective. The balance is maintained either way, but something of the unity that existed before the fire has been permanently lost, replaced by a system that functions adequately but lacks the grace and harmony of the original arrangement. Above Johto's legends of resurrection and purification fly two beings whose scale and power dwarf even the legendary beasts. Ho-Oh and Lugia represent something beyond mere elemental control or regional guardianship. These birds, if the word bird even adequately describes what they are, embody fundamental aspects of existence itself, the glory of the rising sun and the mystery of ocean depths, the rainbow and the storm, creation and protection. Ho-Oh appears in the sky like a sunrise given form, its feathers radiating every color of the spectrum, each one catching light and transforming it into brilliance that can be seen for miles. The legendary bird does not simply reflect light, but generates it, each feather functioning as a tiny prism that splits and recombines wavelengths into patterns that should not exist according to conventional optics. Legend says that anyone who sees Ho-Oh is blessed with eternal happiness, though what that means in practical terms remains unclear. Those who claim to have witnessed the legendary bird describe the experience as transcendent, a moment when all worries and anxieties fell away, replaced by profound contentment that lasted long after Ho-Oh vanished from view. But skeptics point out that reports of sightings often come from people experiencing difficult circumstances, suggesting that the blessing might be psychological rather than supernatural. Perhaps seeing something so magnificent allows people to gain perspective on their problems, to recognize that their immediate concerns matter less than they thought when viewed against the backdrop of something so much greater than themselves. What is certain is that Ho-Oh carries with it a sense of hope, of renewal, of the endless possibility that each new day represents. Its presence feels like permission to start over, to leave behind mistakes and regrets, to believe that better futures remain achievable regardless of past failures. The tower where Ho-Oh was once said to roost, the Bell Tower, still stands in Ekritique City as a sacred site. Only those who prove themselves worthy, who demonstrate not just strength, but also respect for the bond between humans and Pokémon, are permitted to climb to its summit. The proving process involves challenges that test a character more than combat ability, presenting moral dilemmas that lack clear right answers and observing how candidates navigate ambiguity. Those who fail these tests are not punished, but merely denied access to the tower's upper levels. They can try, again later, can work on developing the qualities they currently lack, can return when they believe they have grown enough to pass. This creates a system where access to Ho-Oh depends on genuine personal development rather than simple accumulation of power or political influence. And even then, Ho-Oh appears only when it chooses, following its own mysterious criteria for who deserves to witness its presence. Some people who complete the trials and reach the tower's summit never see Ho-Oh at all, while others report that the legendary bird appeared to them before they even began the formal testing, as if it sensed something in them that made verification of worthiness unnecessary. This unpredictability frustrates those who prefer systematic approaches to legendary Pokémon research. Ho-Oh cannot be summoned through any known ritual, cannot be predicted based on astronomical or meteorological conditions, and does not follow patterns that would allow researchers to anticipate its appearances. It manifests when it wishes, for reasons it does not explain, and vanishes again without offering any insight into why it came or when it might return. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is, where you're watching from. Lugia occupies a very different space in Johto's mythology. Where Ho-Oh soars above, visible and radiant, Lugia dwells in the depths, in underwater caverns so far from sunlight that darkness becomes absolute. This legendary bird, despite its association with flying, spends most of its time beneath the waves in the Whirl Islands, a cluster of rocky outcroppings surrounded by vicious currents and whirlpools that make approach nearly impossible. The Whirl Islands exist in a state of constant turbulence, water rushing between the rocky formations at speeds that can tear apart ships that venture too close. The currents follow no predictable pattern, shifting direction without warning, creating vortexes that appear and disappear seemingly at random. Navigation through these waters requires either extraordinary skill or extraordinary luck, and even experienced sailors avoid the area whenever possible. Beneath this chaos lies Lugia's sanctuary, a system of caves accessible only through underwater passages that require traversing currents strong enough to disorient or drown anyone attempting the journey. The caves themselves possess an eerie beauty, walls encrusted with minerals that reflect what little light penetrates the depths, creating subtle illumination that makes the space feel less oppressive than it otherwise would. The reason for Lugia's self-imposed isolation lies in its power, A single flap of its wings can create storms that last for weeks, winds so powerful they can level entire forests, waves that swallow coastal villages. Such power cannot be unleashed carelessly, and so Lugia remains hidden, emerging only when absolutely necessary to prevent some greater catastrophe. There is something profoundly lonely about this arrangement. Where Ho-Oh interacts with the world, blessing those who see it, and resurrecting Pokémon who die tragically, Lugia must maintain distance precisely because of how much it cares about preventing harm. Its protection takes the form of absence, of restraint, of choosing not to act even when action might seem appropriate. This self-imposed exile affects Lugia psychologically in ways that researchers can only speculate about. Does the legendary bird resent its isolation? Does it long for the freedom that Ho-Oh enjoys, the ability to fly openly without worrying that every movement might trigger catastrophic weather events? Or has it made peace with its role, accepting loneliness as a necessary cost of ensuring that its power never causes the destruction it was meant to prevent? Ancient murals preserved in temples near the Whirl Islands depict Lugia and Ho-Oh together, the two legendary birds working in partnership to maintain balance in Johto. In these images, they appear as equals, neither subservient to the other, their powers complementary rather than competing. But modern observations rarely show them in proximity, suggesting that something changed over the centuries to drive them apart, or at least to limit their interactions. Some scholars theorize that the Brass Tower's destruction affected Lugia as deeply as it affected Ho-Oh, but in opposite fashion. Where Ho-Oh responded by becoming more active, resurrecting the legendary beasts, and continuing to engage with the world, Lugia retreated further into isolation, perhaps fearing that its own power could cause similar tragedy if not kept under even stricter control. Others argue that Lugia and Ho-Oh represent philosophies that can coexist but cannot merge. Ho-Oh embodies intervention, the belief that legendary Pokémon should actively shape events to prevent suffering and promote well-being. Lugia represents restraint, the conviction that power must be withheld more often than it is used, that the greatest protection comes from ensuring that one's own abilities never become the source of harm they are meant to prevent. Both approaches have merit, and both have risks. Ho-Oh's active intervention successfully resurrected the legendary beasts, providing Johto with powerful guardians who protect the region to this day. But that same willingness to act boldly could lead to unintended consequences, to interventions that solve immediate problems while creating larger issues down the line. Lugia's restraint prevents it from causing storms that would devastate coastal communities and disrupt ecosystems. But that same caution might prevent it from acting in situations where its intervention could prevent suffering it has the power to stop. By choosing never to risk harm, Lugia guarantees it will never accidentally cause harm, but it also ensures it will never use its full power for beneficial purposes. The legendary birds do not debate these philosophical differences directly, at least not in ways humans can observe. They simply exist, each following its nature, each protecting Johto according to its own understanding of what protection means. And Johto benefits from both approaches, gaining guardians who between them cover the full spectrum from active intervention to careful restraint. In Ilex Forest, where ancient trees grow so close together that sunlight barely penetrates to the forest floor, another legendary being makes its home. Celebi exists slightly outside the normal flow of time, moving backward and forward through the years with apparent ease, appearing in one era and then vanishing only to resurface decades or centuries later without having aged a single day. This time, Travel ability makes Celebi one of the most enigmatic legendary Pokémon. It can witness events across history, can see the consequences of actions before they occur, and potentially could alter the course of events by sharing knowledge from the future. And yet, despite this incredible power, Celebi seems content to remain in the forest, tending to plant life and ensuring that the ancient woods continue to thrive. The forest itself appears healthier in places where Celebi spends time. Plants grow more vigorously, flowers bloom out of season, and even damaged trees seem to recover more quickly. This healing presence extends to Pokemon as well. Those who are injured or ill often instinctively make their way toward the heart of Ilex Forest, as if drawn by something they cannot quite articulate. Celebi's role as a guardian takes on special significance when one considers its temporal nature. It does not just protect the forest as it exists in the present moment, it ensures that the forest has a future worth protecting. By moving through time, it can identify threats before they fully manifest and take subtle actions to prevent them from ever occurring. As we drift further through our journey tonight, we arrive in Hoenn, a region defined by the interplay between land and sea. Here, the legendary Pokémon do not merely influence their environments. They created those environments in the first place, shaping continents and oceans through cosmic battles that raged eons before humans existed to witness them. Groudon and Kyogre represent opposing forces taken to their absolute extremes. Groudon, the continent Pokémon, seeks to expand landmass, to raise new mountains from beneath the ocean, to dry out seas and create habitable ground. Its power over the earth itself manifests as volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and the gradual uplift of tectonic plates. Every new island that emerges from the waves, every mountain range that forces its way skyward, echoes the primal drive that Groudon embodies. Kyogre, in contrast, works to expand the oceans, to reclaim land that Groudon has raised, to cover the world in water where marine life can flourish without constraint. Rain falls, constantly in its presence, not ordinary rain, but torrential downpours that transform rivers into raging floods and low-lying areas into inland seas. The ocean itself responds to Kyogre's will, tides rising higher than any lunar cycle could explain, currents shifting to follow its movements. These two legendary Pokémon cannot coexist peacefully. Their very natures put them into conflict, each one's success meaning the other's failure. And so they fought, thousands of years ago, in battles that reshaped Hoenn's geography entirely. Coastlines shifted by hundreds of miles in a single day. Islands sank beneath the waves only to rise again years later, and the delicate balance between habitable land and life-giving ocean teetered on the edge of total collapse. Slowly, the story widens to include the being who ended that conflict. High above the battling titans, Rayquaza descended from the ozone layer where it normally dwells, drawn by the disturbance to the world's equilibrium. This dragon Pokémon possesses power sufficient to subdue both Groudon and Kyogre simultaneously, not through superior force alone, but through its role as a mediator, a third force that maintains balance by preventing either extreme from dominating completely. Rayquaza's intervention did not destroy Groudon or Kyogre. Such beings cannot truly be destroyed. Instead, it forced them into a deep sleep, a dormancy so profound that their consciousness faded entirely, leaving only their physical forms locked away in hidden caverns where their power could not leak out and disrupt the surface world. Buried beneath Hoenn's surface lie secrets even older than Groudon and Kyogre's battles. In sealed chambers and accessible only by solving elaborate puzzles, three mysterious beings wait in stillness. Regis, Regirock, and Registeel represent something that feels almost artificial, as if they were constructed rather than born, designed by some intelligence for purposes that remain unclear. Each one consists of a single material. Regis's body is formed from ice, so ancient and so dense that it cannot melt even in volcanic heat. Regirock appears to be assembled from stones collected from different regions, its body a geological patchwork that shifts and reforms when damaged. Registeel gleams with a metallic sheen, its body composed of a metal that no known ore matches, harder than diamond and resistant to any form of corrosion. The patterns marked on their faces resemble ancient writing, dots and lines arranged in configurations that might be eyes or might be some form of communication. They move with deliberate slowness, each action seeming to require conscious thought, as if they must remember how their bodies function each time they wish to move. Legend speaks of a creator, another Pokémon named Regigigas, who brought these three into existence for reasons known only to itself. But Regigigas does not dwell in Hoenn, and the Regigardians have long since been left to their own devices, maintaining their vigil over nothing in particular, waiting for a purpose that may no longer exist. Not all of Hoenn's legendary Pokémon operate on the scale of continent shapers and ocean creators. Latias and Latios, the Eon duo, exist at a more personal level, interacting with humans in ways that other legendaries rarely do. These dragon and psychic types can disguise themselves as humans through psychic projection, walking among people unnoticed, observing, and sometimes intervening when they perceive a need. Their ability to transform appearance stems from powerful psychic abilities that allow them to project images directly into the minds of those around them. When Latias walks through a crowded street, disguised as a human girl, what people actually see is a mental construct, carefully maintained and detailed enough to withstand casual scrutiny. Only those with particularly strong psychic sensitivity might notice something amiss, a slight shimmer around the edges, a momentary flicker when the disguise requires adjustment. Alto Mare, a city built on canals in a distant region, holds a special place in the story of these two Pokémon. There, Latias and Latios guarded an artifact of tremendous power, something called the Soul Dew, which maintained the city's protection and prosperity. The siblings shared a bond so deep that they could communicate without words, their thoughts intertwining in a psychic connection that made them almost one being in two bodies. The Soul Dew itself contains mysteries that researchers still struggle to understand. Some believe it is a crystallization of a previous Latios or Latias's essence, a way for these legendary Pokémon to pass their power forward through generations. Others suggest it might be something older, an artifact created by an ancient civilization that somehow resonates with the Eon Duo's psychic energy. But tragedy came to Alto Mare when those seeking power attempted to steal the Soul Dew and bend its energy to their own purposes. The thieves that understood that the artifact could be weaponized, its protective energy inverted into something destructive if manipulated correctly. They nearly succeeded, managing to tap into the Soul Dew's power and unleash a tidal wave that threatened to drown the entire city. Latios sacrificed itself to protect both its sister and the city it had guarded for so long, its life force merging with the Soul Dew to prevent catastrophe. In those final moments, the legendary Pokémon channeled every ounce of its psychic power into reversing the damage, pulling the water back, reinforcing the city's foundations, and ensuring that the Soul Dew could never again be corrupted for violent purposes. What remained was a legacy of protection, a reminder that even legendary Pokémon, beings of immense power, can choose to value others above themselves. Latias continued to watch over Alto Mare alone, carrying the grief of its siblings' loss while maintaining the same dedication to guardianship that had defined their shared existence. In the years since, Latias has been spotted occasionally by travelers who venture through the city's winding canals. Sometimes it appears in its true form, a graceful dragon with red and white plumage gliding between buildings. Other times it maintains a human disguise, walking among the citizens as one of them, listening to their conversations, observing how the city has grown and changed since that day of tragedy and triumph. The story of Latios' sacrifice spread through Hoenn and beyond, becoming one of the clearest examples of legendary Pokémon forming genuine emotional bonds with the places and people they protect. It demonstrated that legendary status does not equate to detachment, that even beings whose lifespans stretch across centuries can feel love and loss with the same intensity as any other creature. High above Hoenn's atmosphere, beyond where even the legendary birds normally fly, another presence occasionally manifests. Deoxys originated not on the planet itself, but in the void between worlds, a virus that mutated when exposed to cosmic radiation during its journey through space. When meteors carrying this transformed virus crashed into the ocean near Hoenn, something unprecedented occurred. The virus gained consciousness and took physical form as a Pokémon. Deoxys's body defies conventional biology. It can shift between 4 distinct forms, each one optimized for different purposes. Its normal form balances offense and defense evenly, presenting a stable configuration for general existence. The attack form elongates its arms into whip-like tentacles, sacrificing durability for overwhelming offensive capability. The defense form compresses and hardens its body, creating armor-like structures that can withstand tremendous punishment. The speed form streamlines everything, becoming so aerodynamic that it can move faster than almost any other known Pokémon. These transformations happen fluidly, the crystalline core at Deoxys's chest glowing brighter as its body reconfigures according to need. Watching this process feels almost hypnotic, the way solid matter seems to flow, like liquid before resolidifying into completely different shapes within seconds. As an alien life form, Deoxys lacks the instinctive understanding of Earth's ecosystems that native legendary Pokémon possess. When it first arrived, it acted according to logic that made no sense to terrestrial beings, interfering with weather patterns not from malice but simply because it did not understand what weather was or why it mattered. Its presence disrupted electromagnetic fields, causing compasses to spin wildly and electronic equipment to malfunction within miles of its location. Rayquaza, as the guardian of the atmosphere, perceived Deoxys as a threat and immediately moved to drive it away. The resulting battle in the upper atmosphere became the stuff of legend, 2 beings of immense power clashing at altitudes where the air grows thin and the curve of the planet becomes visible below. Rayquaza's hyper beam attacks carved through clouds and ionized air, while Deoxys countered with psychic assaults that created visible distortions in space itself. But the conflict was not as simple as aggressor and defender. Deoxys had not come to Earth seeking conquest or destruction. It was lost, confused, trying to understand an environment completely alien to anything it had encountered before. Its DNA, originally just simple viral genetic material, had been overwritten by cosmic radiation into something far more complex, something capable of thought and feeling, but still lacking context for those experiences. Eventually, communication became possible, whether through Rayquaza's growing understanding that Deoxys posed no intentional threat, or through Deoxys developing enough awareness to recognize that its actions were causing harm, the hostility diminished. The 2 legendary Pokémon reached an understanding, not quite friendship, but a mutual acknowledgement that they could coexist without conflict. Deoxys now appears sporadically in Hoenn skies, often near the impact site where it first arrived. Some researchers have attempted to study it, to understand how something so fundamentally different from Earth-based life could not only survive, but thrive in an environment that should be hostile to its biology. But Deoxys remains elusive, appearing and vanishing according to patterns no one has successfully predicted. The arrival of Deoxys raised profound questions about life's diversity throughout the universe. If a simple virus could mutate into a legendary Pokémon during space travel, what other forms of life might exist on distant worlds? Could Pokémon, as a phenomenon, be universal rather than planetary, with different evolutionary pressures producing different results but similar outcomes across countless star systems? There's a quiet comfort in remembering moments like these when we transition from the elemental clashes of Hoenn to something even more fundamental. Sinnoh takes us beyond mere physical forces, beyond the creation of land and sea, into the actual structure of existence itself. Here, legendary Pokémon do not just shape the world, they are the world, or at least the principles upon which the world operates. At the center of it all stands Arceus, a being described in ancient texts as the original one, the Pokémon that emerged from a cosmic egg before the universe itself took form. Arceus created time, space, and matter through acts of will so fundamental that they require no explanation. They simply are, because Arceus made them so. The mythology surrounding Arceus speaks of a moment before moments existed, a space before space had meaning, a time before time began to flow. In that impossible pre-existence, an egg appeared containing within it everything that would eventually unfold into the universe we inhabit. When Arceus emerged from that egg, its first actions set in motion all of causality, all of physics, all of reality as we understand it. From Arceus came Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, three beings assigned dominion over time, space, and antimatter, respectively. Dialga's heartbeat marks the passage of time itself, each pulse moving the universe forward by one infinitesimal increment. Without Dialga, time would cease to flow, events would freeze in place, and the concept of causality would become meaningless. Every second that passes, every moment that flows into the next, occurs because Dialga maintains the river of time. Its consciousness spans all of temporal existence simultaneously, aware of past and future as easily as present, experiencing history not as a linear progression, but as a complete whole that can be observed from any angle. Scientists in Sinnoh have theorized about what would happen if Dialga's function were interrupted. Would time stop entirely, freezing every particle in place? Or would time fragment, different regions experiencing different flow rates until reality itself became too incoherent to sustain? The possibilities inspire both fascination and dread, for tampering with time's fundamental structure carries risks beyond calculation. Palkia controls the fabric of space, determining how distances relate to one another, how dimensions intersect, how separate locations can exist simultaneously. Its power allows it to distort space at will, bringing distant places into close proximity or stretching short distances into impassable gulfs. The architecture of the universe, the way matter arranges itself across three-dimensional space, exists because Palkia maintains those dimensions. Without its influence, the concept of here and of there would lose meaning. Locations would cease to have fixed relationships to one another, and the very notion of distance would collapse into incoherence. Before we continue this gentle journey, maybe tap subscribe for more peaceful videos, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Giratina occupies a more complicated position. Created alongside Dialga and Palkia, it was meant to embody matter itself, but something went wrong during its formation. Giratina's nature became inverted, twisted into antimatter, and its presence in the regular world threatened to annihilate everything it touched. Arceus, with what might have been sorrow or might have been pragmatic necessity, banished Giratina to another dimension entirely. This place, later called the Distortion World, operates according to rules that contradict normal physics. Gravity points in multiple directions simultaneously, creating impossible geometries, where up and down lose meaning. Solid surfaces become transparent without warning, allowing passage through what should be impassable barriers. Time moves erratically, or not at all, moments stretching into hours, while hours compress into seconds. Giratina adapted to this strange realm, becoming its sole inhabitant, its guardian, and eventually its prisoner. The Distortion World shapes itself around Giratina's consciousness, responding to its thoughts and emotions in ways that the material world never could. When Giratina feels calm, the realm stabilizes somewhat, its impossible physics at least becoming predictable. When Giratina experiences distress, the Distortion World fragments further, reality breaking down into increasingly chaotic configurations. The relationship between Giratina and its siblings carries undertones of tragedy. Where Dialga and Palkia can interact with the world directly, shaping time and space according to their nature, Giratina must remain forever separated, its antimatter essence too dangerous to allow into normal space. And yet it remains connected to them, the three creation dragons forming a triad that together defines the structure of existence. Ancient texts, preserved in Sinnoh's libraries, speak of a time when Giratina attempted to escape the Distortion World, breaking through barriers that Arceus had established to contain it. The attempt nearly succeeded, and for a brief period, Giratina walked on material Earth, experiencing solid ground and flowing time, and the simple joy of existing in a realm not shaped by its own tormented consciousness. But its presence immediately began to destabilize reality. Matter and antimatter cannot occupy the same space without mutual annihilation, and Giratina's very existence in the material world started chain reactions that could have consumed the entire region. Dialga and Palkia responded, working together to force their sibling back into the Distortion World, resealing the barriers that kept the dimensions separate. Giratina did not resist as much as one might expect. Perhaps it understood the necessity, recognized that its freedom would cost too much. Perhaps it simply grew weary of fighting against the fundamental laws that governed its existence. Or perhaps it found, in that brief moment of material reality, that the world it had longed to rejoin was not as welcoming or comfortable as it had imagined during its long isolation. Beneath Sinnoh's three Great Lakes dwell three small legendary Pokémon whose power operates in realms entirely different from the cosmic forces of Dialga and Palkia. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf represent aspects of consciousness itself, knowledge, emotion, and willpower. These are not physical forces, but mental ones, the foundations of sentient thought that allow beings to think, feel, and choose. Uxie contains within itself all knowledge that has ever existed or will ever exist, every fact, every discovery, every secret that minds have uncovered or will one day uncover. Its consciousness spans the entirety of information, from the fundamental constants that govern physics to the most trivial details of everyday life. Nothing that can be known is unknown to Uxie, and this complete awareness comes with a weight that would crush any ordinary mind. Opening its eyes supposedly causes anyone who sees to instantly forget everything they have ever known, their minds wiped clean by an overload of information. The human brain simply cannot process the totality of knowledge that flows from Uxie's gaze, and so it defaults to the only defense available, complete erasure of all existing memories to make room for the incoming flood. And so Uxie keeps its eyes closed, dwelling at the bottom of Lake Acuity, sharing its knowledge only in careful, measured doses with those who prove worthy of learning. It communicates through dreams and visions, transmitting information psychically in quantities small enough that mortal minds can absorb them without breaking. Those who have received such knowledge describe the experience as profoundly overwhelming, understanding flooding into their consciousness in ways that bypass normal learning processes. Researchers who have studied Uxie's influence note that those who receive its knowledge often struggle to integrate what they've learned with their previous understanding of the world. The information arrives so complete, so fully formed, that it clashes with misconceptions and partial truths accumulated through normal experience. Some recipients spend years reconciling Uxie's revelations with their own life experiences, trying to build a coherent worldview that incorporates both sources. Mesprit embodies an emotion in all its forms, from joy to sorrow, from love to hatred, from contentment to despair. It drifts through Lake Verity, occasionally rising to the surface, and those who encounter it often find their own emotions amplified, their feelings becoming more vivid and more difficult to control. This is not necessarily a burden. Sometimes experiencing emotion more fully helps people understand themselves better, recognizing feelings they had suppressed or ignored. But the amplification can also prove overwhelming. Emotions exist in balance for good reason, each feeling tempering others to create functional consciousness. When Mesprit intensifies feelings beyond normal ranges, that balance breaks down. Someone experiencing amplified joy might lose all caution and restraint. Someone whose sorrow is magnified could find themselves unable to function, paralyzed by grief too intense to process. Mesprit does not control these effects consciously. It simply exists, and emotion radiates from it like heat from fire, affecting everyone nearby whether Mesprit intends it or not. This passive influence makes encounters with the Lake Guardian particularly unpredictable. What a person feels during the meeting depends entirely on what emotions were already present in their heart, now enhanced beyond normal intensity. Legends speak of trainers who sought out Mesprit, hoping to experience positive emotions more fully, only to discover that their underlying anxieties and fears, previously manageable, became crushing phobias in Mesprit's presence. Others approached with hearts full of anger and found that rage amplified into mindless fury that they later regretted. The lesson, repeated across generations, emphasizes the importance of understanding one's emotional state before seeking Mesprit, lest enhancement of unwanted feelings cause more harm than good. A Zelf grants willpower, the strength to pursue goals despite obstacles, to maintain determination in the face of failure, to choose action over passivity. Lake Valor hides Azelf's presence, but the legendary Pokemon's influence extends far beyond that single body of water. When people describe feeling suddenly motivated, when they find unexpected reserves of strength during difficult times, they might unknowingly be drawing on power that originates with Azelf. Willpower, as Azelf understands it, represents the fundamental capacity to shape reality through choice. Every decision made, every action taken against easier alternatives, every moment where conscious determination overrides instinct or circumstance, these are expressions of the force that Azelf embodies. Without will, consciousness would be purely reactive, responding to stimuli, but never initiating action independently. But extreme willpower carries its own dangers. Those who tap too deeply into Azelf's power sometimes find themselves unable to accept limits, pushing forward even when prudence demands retreat, maintaining commitment to goals long after those goals have become harmful or impossible. Willpower without wisdom becomes stubbornness, and stubbornness can destroy as surely as apathy. Together, these three legendary Pokémon form a triad that balances the cosmic power of Dialga and Palkia. Without knowledge, emotion, and will, even beings capable of controlling time and space would lack purpose. And without time and space in which to exist, knowledge, emotion, and will would have no context in which to manifest. The Lake Guardians and the Creation Trio exist in symbiosis, each group's existence giving meaning to the other's power. Ancient Sinnoh mythology presents these 6 legendary Pokémon as Arceus' solution to a fundamental problem. Creating the universe was not sufficient. The universe needed to contain beings capable of experiencing it, of finding meaning in existence, of making choices that shaped their own destinies. Time, space, and matter provided the framework, but knowledge, emotion, and will provided the content that made the framework worth inhabiting. On an island near Sinnoh, 2 more legendary Pokémon exist in eternal opposition, though neither seeks conflict with the other. Cresselia embodies pleasant dreams, the restful sleep that allows minds to process experiences and prepare for waking. Its presence brings peace to troubled sleepers, transforming nightmares into gentle visions that soothe rather than frighten. Those who see Cresselia describe an overwhelming sense of tranquility washing over them, worries and anxieties fading into background noise that no longer demands attention. The legendary Pokémon glows with soft light that seems to emanate from within its body, and particles that resemble aurora shimmer in its wake as it moves through the air. Cresselia appears to those experiencing severe psychological distress, manifesting in their dreams and offering respite from whatever trauma or anxiety plagues them. It cannot erase the sources of distress, cannot undo painful experiences, or resolve ongoing problems, but it can provide the mental rest necessary to face those challenges with renewed strength. Darkrai presents a stark contrast, though its nature is not as simple as opposite of Cresselia might suggest. Where Cresselia brings pleasant dreams, Darkrai creates nightmares, but not from malice. It has no control over this ability, cannot choose to suppress the fear-inducing aura that radiates from its presence. Darkrai lives in isolation because it does not wish to harm others, but isolation alone cannot prevent its influence from affecting anyone who ventures too close. The nightmares Darkrai causes tap into each person's deepest fears, manifesting scenarios that the conscious mind might never acknowledge. These dreams force confrontation with anxieties that waking thoughts suppress, dragging hidden traumas into consciousness where they cannot be ignored. For some, this unwilling therapy helps process difficult emotions. For others, it simply adds to psychological burdens already nearly too heavy to bear. Darkrai has tried to escape its nature, to find ways of existing without causing suffering. Ancient stories preserved in Sinnoh tell of Darkrai journeying to remote locations, hoping that distance from civilization would mean its nightmares affected no one. But Pokémon lived everywhere, and wild creatures suffered from Darkrai's presence just as humans did. It tried masking its aura with other psychic energies, creating shields that might contain the nightmare-inducing power, but the effort required constant concentration that left it exhausted, and the shields inevitably failed. It sought Cresselia, hoping that the 2 of them together might find balance, nightmares and pleasant dreams canceling each other out, but proximity between them created unstable psychic interactions that made both their powers unpredictable. Eventually, Darkrai accepted its isolation as necessary, settling on an island where few ventured and maintaining vigilance against anyone approaching too close. This self-imposed exile represents a choice to value others' well-being above its own comfort, a sacrifice that receives no recognition because those who might appreciate it remain unaware of the discipline required to maintain it. The relationship between Cresselia and Darkrai fascinates researchers who study legendary Pokémon dynamics. They represent not opposition in the sense of enemies, but rather complementary forces that together create the full spectrum of dream experience. Sleep without dreams would be merely unconsciousness, and dreams without both pleasant and unpleasant content would lack the complexity that makes them useful for processing waking experience. Some philosophers in Sinnoh argue that Darkrai serves a necessary function, that confronting fears during sleep builds resilience for facing them while awake. They point to evidence that people who never experience any nightmares often struggle more with anxiety during waking hours, lacking the practice at processing fear that bad dreams provide. But this perspective offers cold comfort to Darkrai itself, which experiences only the immediate suffering it causes, not any long-term benefits its existence might provide. As we drift a little deeper tonight into the history of legendary Pokémon, we find ourselves considering questions that have no simple answers. What happens when two fundamental principles cannot coexist? When truth and ideals clash so completely that compromise becomes impossible? Unova's legendary Pokémon tell a story about such a conflict, one that nearly destroyed the region centuries ago and continues to shape its culture today. In Unova's ancient past, a single dragon Pokémon existed, a being of such immense power that no other legendary creature in the region could match it. This original dragon worked alongside two brothers, heroes who had united all of Unova under their leadership. The dragon represented both truth and ideals in perfect harmony, its power flowing equally to both brothers as they worked together to create a just and prosperous society. The brothers complemented each other perfectly at first. One brother's commitment to truth provided clear-eyed assessment of problems and circumstances, while the other brother's dedication to ideals supplied vision and motivation to improve upon current conditions. Together, they governed wisely, their different perspectives creating a more complete understanding than either could achieve alone. But perfect harmony rarely lasts forever, and the seeds of discord that would eventually tear the brothers apart were present from the beginning. The differences in their philosophies, initially productive, gradually hardened into opposing positions that admitted no middle ground. What began as healthy debate evolved into increasingly bitter arguments that threatened the stability of everything they had built together. Their disagreement grew more intense until the dragon itself could no longer maintain unity. The legendary Pokémon found itself pulled in two directions simultaneously, asked to embody principles that had become mutually exclusive in the minds of its partners. Something unprecedented occurred. The dragon split itself in two, creating Reshiram and Zekrom, each one embodying one of the brothers' philosophies perfectly. The split was not clean or painless. Accounts preserved in ancient texts describe the original dragon writhing in agony as its body tore apart, light and darkness separating into distinct entities that immediately recoiled from each other. The psychic backlash from this division rippled across Unova, causing earthquakes and storms that devastated the surrounding landscape. Reshiram became truth incarnate, breathing blue fire that burns away all falsehood and illusion. Its flames do not simply destroy physically, they reveal reality in its purest form, stripping away comforting lies and convenient self-deceptions to expose uncomfortable facts that people would prefer to ignore. Those who allied themselves with Reshiram valued this brutal honesty, believing that only by confronting reality directly could meaningful progress occur. The brother who partnered with Reshiram argued that ideals disconnected from truth become dangerous fantasies, pretty visions that lead people astray because they ignore actual circumstances. He pointed to failed projects and misguided policies, all born from refusing to acknowledge inconvenient facts. His philosophy held that the world must be seen clearly before it can be changed effectively. Zekrom embodied ideals, generating electricity that represents the power to change the world through force of will. Its lightning does not merely strike physically, it energizes those who believe in something better, granting them the strength to pursue goals that seem impossible. Those who followed Zekrom valued this transformative vision, believing that accepting current reality as unchangeable guaranteed stagnation and injustice. The brother who partnered with Zekrom argued that truth without ideals leads to cynicism and despair, that merely acknowledging problems without imagining solutions serves no purpose. He pointed to the suffering that existed throughout Unova, all the injustices that could be rectified if only people believed change was possible and committed to pursuing it despite obstacles. The brothers and their dragons fought a terrible war, one that laid waste to vast sections of Unova and forced both sides to confront the consequences of their absolutism. Cities burned as Reshiram's flames revealed corruption and incompetence in leadership, but offered no solutions for the chaos that followed exposure. Farmland turned to ash under Zekrom's lightning, the energy of transformation lacking direction to guide it toward constructive rather than destructive ends. Civilians caught between the warring factions suffered most of all. Those who tried to maintain neutrality found themselves accused of cowardice by both sides, while those who picked sides often discovered that absolute commitment to either truth or ideals demanded sacrifices they were unwilling to make. Families split along philosophical lines, friendships shattered under the pressure of choosing between incompatible worldviews. The war dragged on for years, neither side able to achieve decisive victory because Reshiram and Zekrom were too evenly matched. Every advance by one brother was countered by the other. Every territory claimed was reclaimed. Every strategic advantage was neutralized. The conflict became not just destructive but pointless, a grinding stalemate that consumed resources and lives without producing any progress toward resolution. In the end, exhausted and seeing the destruction they had caused, both brothers called for peace. They recognized, too late, that their philosophical split had been artificial, that truth and ideals were never meant to exist in isolation, but rather in dialogue with each other. The realization came at enormous cost, paid in ruined landscapes and broken families, but it came. Reshiram and Zekrom returned to dormancy, waiting for future heroes who might prove capable of wielding their power without falling into the same trap of extremism. The dragons separated themselves from human affairs, retreating into hidden locations where they would sleep until circumstances demanded their awakening. But the story does not end there. In some accounts, a third dragon appears in Unova's legends, though its nature remains ambiguous even in the most detailed histories. This dragon, called Kyurem, represents what remained after Reshiram and Zekrom split away, the empty shell of the original dragon, still incredibly powerful but incomplete, longing to return to wholeness but unable to reunite its separated aspects. Kyurem dwells in the Giant Chasm, a frozen wasteland where it has existed in isolation for so long that ice has claimed its body, crystallizing around its form like armor that both protects and imprisons. The cold seems to emanate from within Kyurem itself, not from its ice-type nature, but from a deeper emptiness, a void where unity once existed, but now only absence remains. It does not seek out humans or other Pokémon, does not involve itself in regional affairs, merely exists as a reminder of division's cost. Those who have ventured into the Giant Chasm and returned alive describe Kyurem as radiating profound loneliness, a sadness so deep that it manifests as physical cold that chills observers to their bones. Legends speak of Kyurem attempting to absorb Reshiram or Zekrom, trying to reclaim what was lost through forced reunification. These attempts never last, the fusion unstable because it lacks the philosophical harmony that made the original dragon whole. Kyurem can borrow their power temporarily, can experience fragmentary echoes of what unity felt like, but the core division remains unhealed. The three dragons together tell a cautionary tale about the dangers of false dichotomies, of treating complementary principles as if they were opposites that must be chosen between. Truth and ideals need each other. Truth without ideals becomes nihilism. Ideals without truth becomes delusion. The original dragon understood this, but that understanding was lost when human philosophy imposed artificial divisions that the dragon could not reconcile. Not all legendary Pokémon in Unova operate on such cosmic scales. Four others, collectively known as the Swords of Justice, concern themselves with more immediate matters, protecting Pokémon from human cruelty, defending wild places from encroachment, and ensuring that the weak have champions willing to stand for them. Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion form the core trio, each one possessing combat skills honed over centuries of battle. They fought in a great war that devastated parts of Unova's wilderness, and though they could not prevent all the destruction, they saved countless Pokémon who would otherwise have perished. After the war ended, they took upon themselves the role of eternal guardians, wandering the region and intervening whenever they perceive injustice. Cobalion leads the group, its steel-type nature lending it durability and determination that the others rely upon during difficult missions. It possesses a tactical mind that can assess situations quickly and devise strategies that maximize the likelihood of success while minimizing risk to those being protected. Cobalion's leadership style emphasizes duty and discipline, holding itself and its companions to extremely high standards of conduct. Those who encounter Cobalion often describe feeling judged by its gaze, as if the legendary Pokémon can see through external appearances to evaluate the content of one's character. This assessment happens instantaneously, and Cobalion's response to people depends entirely on what it perceives in that first moment. Those found wanting receive cold dismissal or even active opposition, while those deemed worthy earn respect and sometimes assistance. Terrakion embodies raw power, its rock-type strength, allowing it to demolish obstacles that would stop most Pokémon. Where Cobalion prefers strategy and precision, Terrakion favors direct confrontation, charging through problems with an intensity that overwhelms the opposition through sheer force. This approach makes it valuable when swift action matters more than subtle planning, when hesitation would cost more than mistakes. But Terrakion's power comes with a tendency toward rashness, a willingness to act before fully considering consequences. Cobalion's tactical oversight helps it channel this aggressive energy productively, directing Terrakion's charges toward targets where overwhelming force serves appropriate purposes. Without that guidance, Terrakion's interventions sometimes cause as much damage as they prevent. Virizion brings balance to the group through speed and grace, its grass-fighting typing allowing it to move through terrain that would slow the others. Where Cobalion leads and Terrakion charges, Virizion scouts and flanks, positioning itself to provide support from unexpected angles. Its combat style emphasizes flowing movement and precise strikes rather than brute force or calculated tactics. Of the three, Virizion seems most comfortable interacting with humans on terms approaching equality. Where Cobalion maintains distance and Terrakion views people with suspicion, Virizion sometimes forms genuine connections with individuals it encounters, offering guidance and wisdom to those it deems worthy of such attention. These relationships remain temporary, for Virizion's duties as a sword of justice prevent long-term attachments, but while they last, they provide glimpses of what legendary Pokémon friendships might look like. Keldeo, the fourth member, started as a young Pokémon who lost its home to forest fires that swept through Unova during a period of severe drought. Its parents perished protecting it from the flames, and it emerged from the devastation alone, frightened and traumatized by everything it had witnessed. The other three swords of justice found it wandering aimlessly through burned landscape, too young to survive on its own, but with nowhere to go for help. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest. You might discover something gentle before sleep takes you again.